The morning I heard that chainsaw echo across the neighborhood, I knew something big was about to go down. You could feel it in the air, that quiet, electric tension that comes right before someone finally says enough. My granddad, Earl Weston, wasn't the kind of man who made noise for attention. But when that maple tree hit the ground with a crash that sent birds flying for miles, the HOA's grip on our land cracked right along with it. Karen didn't even have time to yell before he folded open his camping chair, sat down on the stump like a king, reclaiming his throne, and said, "You plant on my land, I harvest it. That's just simple math." Now, to really understand what led to that moment, you have to go back a week earlier, back to when the HOA decided our yard needed to be beautified. That's what they called it, beautified. As if decades of sweat soil and hard work weren't already beautiful enough. They sent out flyers with fancy logos and fake smiles printed on them promising uniformity and harmony. But when the landscaping crew showed up at sunrise with their little yellow truck, they didn't bother knocking. They tore out Granddad's old mesquite tree, the one his father planted before half this subdivision even existed, and replaced it with a fragile red maple tied up in rubber straps like some showroom prop. When Granddad stepped out onto the porch that morning, coffee mug in hand, he didn't say a word. He just stared at the hole where his tree used to be, the roots that had outlived 2 droughts and 3 storms lying in a heap like bones. Karen, the head of the HOA, stood there in her crisp white blouse, clipboard in one hand, smug little smile on her face, saying, "We're elevating neighborhood standards, Mr. Weston. It's all in the beautification directive." He just blinked at her and said quietly, "That tree's been here longer than you've been bossing folks around." She laughed, said something about community spirit, and walked away like she hadn't just buried part of our family history. The next day we noticed water seeping through the soil near the barn. Chickens were wading through mud, and the feed was ruined. Turned out the crew had damaged the irrigation pipe running under the old root system. When Granddad called Karen to report it, she actually laughed, said it wasn't their responsibility that the incident occurred on private property. I could hear the anger in his silence as he hung up. That night, he sat on the porch polishing his old wrench and said almost to himself, "They think they planted a tree, but what they really planted was a fight." By sunrise, I heard him in the garage tuning his chainsaw, every pull of the cord sounding like a war drum. He had me grab a cooler, his folding chair, and that faded flannel he always wore when he meant business. Today, he said, we remind them who owns this dirt. The first cut sliced through the quiet like thunder. Bark flew, sawdust danced in the air, and just as the trunk started to lean, Karen's white Lexus came screeching to a halt. She stormed out in her heels, hair-perfect clipboard in hand, and yelled, "That's an approved tree. Mr. Weston, Section 14C clearly states." He revved the chainsaw loud enough to drown her out, eyes steady on hers. She froze, trembling with fury. Within minutes, neighbors started coming out. Mr. Loomis across the street with his cat, the Alvarez family, with lawn chairs. People stood by the fence sipping coffee, watching as Granddad finished the job. The maple cracked, groaned, and came down in one glorious fall. He shut off the saw, placed it neatly on the grass, and sat down on the stump like he'd just clocked out from a shift at Destiny. "She was blocking my view," he said calmly. Karen stood there speechless, clutching her clipboard like a shield that suddenly didn't mean anything. An hour later, she came back with reinforcements, Dale and Tanya, 2 HOA board members who treated bylaws like holy scripture. Dale puffed up his chest and said, "The HOA approved this tree as part of neighborhood development." Granddad looked at him deadpan and asked, "Did the land approve it?" Nobody spoke after that. For the rest of the day, he sat there on the stump while neighbors brought him coffee pie, even a newspaper. The stump had become a protest chair, and whether he meant it or not, he'd started something bigger than himself. By afternoon, it wasn't just defiance, it was a block party. Families dragged out folding chairs and started swapping stories about their own run-ins with the HOA. fines for mismatched garden gnomes, warnings for faded curtains, even one woman fined because her bird feeder wasn't aesthetic. Karen stood there barking about unauthorized gatherings, but no one cared anymore. For once, people were laughing on their own lawns without fear of getting a letter. The next morning, Granddad laid out an entire table full of documents, property deeds, survey maps, notarized letters, and even a stamped irrigation permit from the 70s. "We won't need a chainsaw this time," he said. Sure enough, by noon, Karen was back with a lawyer in a blazer who looked allergic to sunlight. They tried to serve him a violation notice for destruction of HOA property. He just nodded politely and handed them a certified county survey showing that the maple had been planted 6 feet into private setback territory, completely outside HOA jurisdiction. Then he played them a recording from one of the contractors saying Karen told them to just get it done without homeowner consent. You could see the lawyer's face drop. Karen stammered something about revised community standards, but Granddad just pulled out one last paper, a cease and desist order from the city itself. "Effective immediately," he said, "until y'all remember where your boundaries end." You could hear the air leave Karen's chest. She left without another word, clutching that binder like a lifeline. That evening, something incredible happened. The neighbors who'd been afraid to speak up started gathering again, this time to hold a real meeting out in the open, right on our lawn. No boardroom, no podium, just folks with chairs, coolers, and voices that finally mattered. Someone asked who'd actually voted for any of Karen's projects. Nobody raised a hand. Even the board president admitted they'd been signing off without reading. When someone finally said, "Maybe it's time she steps down," no one disagreed. Karen walked away that night silent, and for the first time in years, the air felt lighter. A week later, a box showed up on our porch. No name, no return address. Inside was a small oak sapling with a tag that read, "For the man who plants back better." Granddad smiled and said, "Guess it's time to put something right." That weekend, half the neighborhood showed up to help plant it. No permission slips, no regulations, just people working together. They planted it beside the stump, not over it, because he said, "You don't erase what you learn from." Now that oak stands taller every year right beside the stump where it all began. Kids play under it, folks stop to talk, and sometimes you'll see someone just sitting there quietly thinking. The HOA still exists, but it's different now. Smaller, kinder. People make their own decisions together. And Granddad. He still sits there some mornings, sipping coffee eyes on that tree, smiling like he finally made peace with the land that never stopped being his. He once told me, "People think power means talking loud or carrying a clipboard, but real power, it's knowing when to stay seated and let silence speak." So yeah, maybe one man with a chainsaw can't change the world, but he sure can change a neighborhood. If you were in his shoes, would you have done the same? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about where the line between rules and respect really lies. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories that remind us all who really owns the dirt under our feet.